Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Richard Moglen. I'm welcome back to our weekly Watchlist video sponsored by MarketSmith. And overall, here are the names on my focus list for this upcoming trading week. And throughout this video, we'll talk about the fundamentals and the technical setup for each of them. And if you do enjoy this video, please go ahead and right now take the time and leave me a like down below. It just takes a few seconds and helps me out immensely. And go ahead and subscribe as well if you haven't already. Now with that said, let's dive right in and start with AMD. And throughout this video, kind of give me your take on the setups down below in the comment section. So overall, starting with this name, this is one of the leading names in a leading group. And you can see basically it's got fantastic earnings, sales margins the past 4 quarters, really strong estimates for 2021 and fall through in 2022. And I think this is really important. And looking at the fund ownership trend, really nice increase over the past 2 years and 3 high quality funds in there as well. As for chart, it's moved quite strongly here, but is kind of forming out a base against the 50-day SMA. You do have a pivot right at this level, right below 150. And ideally, you'd actually get a few days of pullback against the 21 EMA, let that 50 SMA catch up. Then we'd have a breakout and you can manage risk right at that swing low. So overall, that's kind of what I'm watching for. But overall, I definitely think you should have some exposure to the semi space as well as the data storage group. And this is one of the leading names within those two groups. So moving on, we've got our next stock, APP, App 11 Corp. Overall great earnings and sales the past 2 quarters and really strong estimates for 2022. I think this is huge. Looking at the fund ownership, you've already got 136 funds in here and 1 high quality fund in there as well. Once again, this is forming out a base. You've got a pivot right below the 100 level, but I'm watching for a breakthrough 50 SMA, and ideally it kind of goes sideways below this pivot, right below that key moving average, and then we get a pop through that and it starts to move up the right hand side. But that's what I'm watching for App 11. I like how it's found support pretty much at the anchor view app from the IPO. If you draw it from this bar right here, as well as the high in this space, you can see it found support right at that logical level. So that is APP. Definitely a recent IPO, I think, to have on your watch list. Moving on, we've got Bros, and once again, I think this is definitely a name to have on your watch list, especially if you're focusing on newer issues and recent IPOs. Great earnings, sales margins the most recent 4 quarters, really great estimates for this year and the next, although estimate revisions are down. Already 162 funds, and look at this, 3 high quality funds. This really adds to my conviction, but you always want to keep in mind with these new issues that they could enter a longer term basing period. And it's already had a little bit of an IPO advance phase here, so we'll just have to see how this plays out. But overall, you had a wedge pop on this Thursday, and what I'm watching for is maybe a few inside days, let it consolidate a little bit, allow me to manage risk versus a logical level, and basically start a move back up the right hand side of this base, and ideally push and trend back towards 80. So that is BROS, and it isn't quite in a leading group, but given that it is an IPO, it does have a lot of potential. Moving on, we've got DataDog, and this has held up pretty well and formed a decent looking base here. Overall great earnings and sales the most recent 2 quarters, great estimates for this year, and really nice fall through in 2022, and estimate revisions are up. That's great. A nice increase in fund ownership from 164 all the way to 1,000, and you've got 4 high quality funds in here as well. So overall, looking at the chart, it's formed a really nice pivot and actually had an inside day on Thursday. So this is the logical pivot point for me. You've also got another pivot right at these levels, so I like how that's lining up. And overall, it's forming a nice higher low, great relative strength as well. And this is kind of one of the better looking stocks in the software space. And it is kind of one knock against the stock because the overall software group isn't doing too hot, so keep that in mind. But this is a decent looking base, and it's got a nice prior uptrend from a stage 1 base. So this would be a stage 2. So definitely want to have on your watch list, and we'll have to see whether that computer software enterprise group kind of rallies strongly off the bottom. And if it does, I think this is one of the leaders within that group. So moving on, we've got DLTR. Definitely a nice looking setup. I think I got this from PBA on Twitter. Really tight the past few days. That's what I like, especially after this nice upside reversal shakeout. And you don't have the greatest quarterly numbers down here, but you do have really nice estimates for 2023. Overall, fund ownership is pretty much flat over the past 2 years and no high quality funds in here. So this is really just a play on the chart, which is nice and orderly, linear, and basically showing nice action and really tight to end out last week. So maybe we have a breakthrough these pivots, or maybe we get a shakeout outside day, and that kind of starts to trend up back towards 150. Moving on, we've got GFS, which is an IPO within a semiconductor group here. A really strong earnings report the most recent quarter, earnings up 111%, sales up 56%, and you've got a nice breakout year expected in 2022, although estimate revisions are down. No real fund ownership info just yet, but clicking this, you can see that there are 136 funds owning basically this stock as of this moment. And overall, this looks pretty promising. Forming out a base here could take a few more weeks to develop. Maybe it pulls back into 60 here, goes sideways, pulls back a little bit, but I'm watching for basically a reconfirmation of this trend. And I really like the upside reversals here. And it found support at the bottom of this IPO base, right at the anchored VWAP from the IPO day right here. And this is pretty liquid, so kind of ticks all the boxes I look for in an IPO and IPO base. And we'll have to see how this basically develops. You got a nice depth here of only 23%. So moving on, we've got our next stock, GTLB, another recent IPO, and overall really nice sales growth the past 4 quarters. And overall, not much to say in terms of annual EPS. It's not profitable just yet, but you've already got 2 high quality funds invested into this stock. Overall, it has pulled back pretty far from 137 all the way down to, let's see, around 70, but it's making a push up the right hand side and is forming a pivot right below 100. Nice action on Thursday as well. So I'm watching for reconfirmation and ideally actually kind of build out this space a lot more, because this side, the left side, shows a lot of distribution and is pretty vertical. So maybe we go sideways for a few weeks, but I think this is definitely one to watch as it tries to form out its first primary base here below 100. So I have to see whether GitLab works out, but I think it's definitely worth watching in the IPO space. Moving on, we've got Lucid, which is getting tight here at the bottom of the base and volume is drying up, but this could be a bear flag. So please keep in mind that if it breaks down here, the setup is definitely void. But overall, I like how it's pulled back to kind of this prior basically high volume close from this breakout. And now volume is drying up, as I said, but it does have to get back above the 50 SMA, 21 EMA as well, and start the right hand side of this base. So I'm watching for basically a wedge pop here through 40. Not really any growth metrics just yet. Annual estimates are up, but you've already got a decent amount of fund ownership and one high quality fund in there as well. So moving on, let's talk about PDFS, forming out a base here after a nice gap up on earnings on very high volume. And you've got a DTL right at these levels pretty much, and also the pivot at 31.27 or 97, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, 31.97. So definitely want to watch here. Nice shakeouts at the lows of this base, and overall really nice volume pattern within this consolidation. Looking at the numbers, you've got a nice earnings report of 500%, so up 28%, and really strong estimates for 2022 up 867%. Fund ownership is pretty much flat, and there's no high quality funds invested into this stock. Moving on, we've got PSTG, another name within the computer data storage group. Great earnings and sales in the most recent 2 quarters, really strong estimates for this year and fall through in 2022, or actually 2023 rather. And you've got a decent growth in fund ownership over the past 2 years. And looking at the chart, we did have a failed breakout, pretty much a squat on Thursday, but maybe it opens up in the wick and provides kind of a secondary buy point through this pivot or through the high of Thursday. And overall, I really like the trend from this gap up within this base. So moving on, we've got PUBM, and this is kind of a similar setup to the Lucid chart, getting really tight at the bottom of this base. And either it forms a wedge pop and breaks through the 200-day moving average and starts a trend towards 40, or it breaks down and kind of needs a lot more time to reset and rebase. But overall, really nice numbers down here, earnings, sales margins the past 4 quarters. And looking at the numbers here, really strong estimates for 2021, not so much for 2022, although the estimate revisions are up, but I would like to see this get positive 100%. Looking at the fund ownership, it is trending higher, although you do have a dip the most recent quarter, and you also have one high quality fund invested into this name. So that is PUBM, watching for a wedge pop off the 50 SMA, and it definitely is getting pretty tight with volume drying up, which is a kind of textbook pattern that I like to buy up the right hand side of bases, or in this case, a potential low cheat. Moving on, we've got our last stock. We've got SLAB, Silicon Labs. Overall nice growth numbers the most recent few quarters, not so much this most recent quarter, but you did have a really nice price reaction here. Earnings are really strong for 2021, nice fall through for 2022. Fund ownership is pretty much flat and no high quality funds in here just yet. Overall, this is also another name within the leading group. and overall forming a nice flat base, stage 3 base after this strong push. So I'm watching for a breakout through the 206.84 pivot and a continuation through the 210.98 pivot as well. So overall, that's my list going into next week. Let me know your thoughts down below on these setups, and also give me your top idea that you're watching going into next week. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like down below, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you guys in future videos. Thanks.